Being a professional fighter takes a lot of skill, fitness, and endurance. But for some athletes, the fight begins weeks before the cage door ever closes. While almost everyone cuts weight to compete, some take it to extremes.
The best at it is this guy, Alex Pereira. He weighs in at 185 pounds. He fights at 220 plus.
Inside the octagon, everybody wants to be bigger, stronger, and harder to move. And the best way to get that is to compete at the lowest weight possible. At the end of the day, the fighter who can suffer longer and push deeper into the misery of the cut often walks into fight night with a hidden edge. So this is every level of UFC weight bullying, from the lanky snipers who weaponize reach to the scale's final bosses who break their bodies chasing impossible cuts. The first level of UFC weight bully belongs to fighters who aren't just trying to be bigger, but actually longer than their opponents. Typically hiding behind a skyscraper reach and a wiry frame, these fighters weaponize distance. Fighting these types of fighters is never really safe. When you think you're outside punching range, you may get popped with a jab, or even worse, a deadly straight.
He also has great penetration on his punches.
Yes.
When he throws that left hand, he boom! Yeah, he's going through you.
Conor McGregor at featherweight is the prime example of that. At 145, the Notorious looked like he was a few pounds away from starring in The Walking Dead. Just look at the difference in his fight against Aldo compared to the one against Cowboy Cerrone.
145 for Mr. McGregor! Weight 170 for Mr. McGregor!
It's no wonder McGregor looked untouchable at featherweight. On top of having elite skills, he was also longer than most and strong enough to shut down wrestlers like Chad Mendes. But it's no wonder his 145 reign was short-lived. Looking like death at every weigh-in had to come with a cost, which could explain why McGregor jumped to lightweight as soon as he got the belt.
My God, look how skinny he looks. Look at his face, his cheekbones. He looks like he just got out of like some Russian prison. Like that, you know what I mean? Bro, that one on the right is insane. It's insane.
With muscles.
That's insane. I wonder how much weight he lost.
Former bantamweight champion and pound-for-pound owner of the worst hair in the UFC, Sean O'Malley, is another fighter who fits this category. Fighting at 135 pounds while maintaining a 5'11 build, O'Malley looks less like a bantamweight and more like a welterweight on a hunger strike. Much like Conor, Sean adapted his style to fit his body type, knowing that at bantamweight, he'll almost always be the longer man. His 5'11 frame and reach advantage let him dictate distance, forcing shorter opponents to strike on his terms. But that's not to say the road to making 135 is easy.
Weight cuts are a weird thing. Literally in the moment, Thursday night when you're cutting the most weight, you feel like you're dying a little bit. Like your heart is pounding. You literally feel like you're kind of like one of the first couple phases of like dying.
Tony Ferguson is another tall and lanky fighter who used his reach and size to outmatch their opponents. Unlike Conor and O'Malley, Ferguson wasn't a one-punch knockout artist. Instead, Tony used his size to pressure his opponents, always having them walk backward amid the imminent threat of elbows and punches. His long arms almost turned the Darce choke into a nightmare. With his reach, he could lock it in from angles most fighters couldn't even attempt, making it one of his trademarks. But despite being pretty big for a lightweight, Tony never really had much trouble making weight. He was one of those rare tall fighters who could cut down without looking like he was on the verge of collapse. And oddly enough, many attribute repeated weight cuts in a short time frame as the primary reason for his historic downfall. In 2020, he infamously cut to 155 twice in the span of a month, once just to prove he could when Khabib pulled out, and then again for the fight against Justin Gaethje weeks later.
Tony looked off tonight, thought he looked slow, and I would have to imagine that cutting weight twice in a month will affect you.
The two weight cuts back-to-back, plus the unfathomable amount of damage he took in the Gaethje fight, left him looking like a shell of a fighter fans had come to know. From that night on, El Cucuy was never quite the same, and the aura of invincibility that carried him through a 12-fight win streak seemed to vanish. Tall and lanky fighters are some of the most dangerous in the sport. Their reach makes them snipers, their wiry frames make them elusive. But the ladder of weight bullying doesn't just stop at skinny assassins. The next level is even harsher. Fighters who don't just stretch the tape measure, they break the scale. Alright, just quickly before we go on, subscribe if you want more deep dives into fighter legacies, the power plays behind scenes, and the stories that don't usually get told. Some fighters don't just look taller, they legit look like they should be one of 2 weight classes above. You can't touch what you can't reach, and if you can't reach them, you're in for a bad night. John Jones was a master at using this frame effectively. He was tall and long even for a light heavyweight, and he made his opponents pay dearly for trying to close the distance.
It hurts so bad trying to get close to him. I tell you that, hey, dude, it hurts so bad. Joe, it hurts so bad. The kicks to the body and the knees, because you know me, like Kane, me and Kane were forward, head movement, get close, punch, take you down.
Right.
But with him, he was a southpaw, so his lead leg was right there, so I wanted to grab a single leg. But this dude would be stepping back, kneeing me. And then I'd be like, okay, so I need to stop going forward. So now I'm at range, and he blasts body kick, and then body kick. So now you're like, I'm not going to stay on the end of these body kicks because they hurt.
Think of Jalen Turner fighting at lightweight. The guy towers over everyone in the division, standing at 6'3" with the frame of a middleweight. Turner's physical attributes can give him a significant advantage at 155, but managing such a drastic weight loss comes at a price.
158.
158, the official weight for Jalen Turner, 2 pounds over the lightweight limit.
The thing about weight bullies is that they actually have to make the weight, and when they don't, not only can they end up on Dana White's naughty list, repeated offenders are forced to move up, paired on bad matchups, or branded as unreliable.
I'm not thrilled with Kelvin Gastelum right now. This guy's missed weight like 3 times in his career. You got kids taking fights on a week notice, jumping off cards, coming over here and making weight, and Kelvin doesn't make weight. It's extremely disappointing.
Another example of a fighter with a frame too big for his weight class would be Darren Till, back when he was fighting at 170 pounds. During his first UFC run, Till stormed through the division, extending an unbeaten streak of 18 fights. In his fight against Cowboy Cerrone, he had easily 20 pounds on him by fight night. The size difference was glaring. Cerrone looked like a natural lightweight who had bulked up, while Till looked like a middleweight who had starved down. To make welterweight, Darren Till drained nearly 40 pounds in just 2 days before the fight. It was insane, and Darren is the first to admit it.
I ain't no welterweight. I'm a light heavyweight fighting in the welterweight. It should be illegal what I'm doing. The UFC should ban it, but they can't because I do it naturally and I do it professionally, and no one can do a thing about it.
At 170, Till had a clear size and strength advantage, but going through the grinder every weigh-in would eventually catch up to him, and despite his youth, it happened faster than expected.
My last weight cut to 170 was against Masvidal, and I remember going blind a few hours before weighing in. I remember we got to the hotel, and it was the night before weigh-ins, and I remember I'd done my usual, I do like a 50-minute run with 4 layers of clothing on with all my sweet sweats, like the gels and that. Lost weight, went and hit pads, and I was still so far off, and Colin was just like, what are we gonna do?
Shane Burgos was another fighter who pushed the limits at featherweight. With a dense, wide torso and thick build, he looked more like a lightweight squeezing into 145. And then there's Dan Hooker, who tried to return to featherweight after years at lightweight. At 6 feet tall, the height disparity was almost comical. He looked like a giant standing across from natural 145ers. He looked great at the weigh-ins, but looks can be deceiving.
Looked fantastic, but you also understand what he had to do to get that look, right? That look is a byproduct of hunger, of overtraining, and of dehydration. None of those 3, let alone all of them together, are a good recipe to go out and have your best performance.
But Hooker's recent venture at 145 goes to show that size is far from the only thing necessary to win a fight. Dan drained his body so much to make the weight that when it came to fight night, he looked like a shell of his former self. He faced the natural featherweight Arnold Allen in his comeback. Allen is one of the most technical fighters in the UFC, but he's far from a knockout artist. Despite this, when he faced Hooker, he dispatched him with shocking ease in the first round. And that's the thing about frame breakers. Sometimes the body just isn't meant to stay in a smaller division. That's where the next level of weight bullying comes in. Fighters who don't just look oversized, but they look like they belong in another weight class entirely. The next level of fighters taking weight cutting to the extreme involves fighters who look like they're squeezing into the wrong division. More often than not, the strategy backfires, because while they're bigger and stronger, having to go through severe weight cuts every camp ultimately hinders their performance. Non-surprisingly, these athletes usually end up performing better once they move to a higher weight class. One of the most glaring examples of that would be Dustin Poirier, back when he was still rocking the pea-head days.
But I think he called me pea-head or something. That doesn't even make sense to me. I don't even know what that is.
A pea head is like a pea that you eat. It's like a small little green pea. He just has an unusually small head, I believe, with a weird little goatee.
Dustin started his career at lightweight, but when he reached the UFC, determined to maximize his chances at the highest level, he cut down to featherweight.
I mean, you were a big 145. Like, how rough was that cut?
It was horrible, and it made me hate the process because my quality of life sucked. You know, training camps were torture. You know, I would walk around 190.
Jesus
I'd get up to 190.
Christ.
I'd get up to 190.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You get up to 190 and
Yeah.
go down to 145. 45 pounds.
He was a competent 145er, but would often come up short against the division's elite. After his loss to McGregor, Dustin moved up in weight, and it was the best decision he could have had. At lightweight, Poirier went on a legendary tear. He captured the interim title, took out nearly everyone put in front of him, and even twice avenged his loss to McGregor. Perhaps his best example of a fighter who looked out of place cutting down, but flourished after moving up, is Charles Oliveira. After stringing 3 straight losses way back in 2011, Charles moved down to featherweight. The Brazilian isn't even a small lightweight, which means that at featherweight, he was gigantic. To this day, at 155 pounds, Oliveira's weight cut looks more like a Brazilian send-off ritual than a professional weigh-in. So you can imagine how hard it was for him to cut down below a weight class. It's no wonder Charles was a middling featherweight, constantly battling the scale and often tipping above the division's limit. Once he finally moved back to 155, he suffered a devastating loss to Paul Felder. But after that, Oliveira strung one of the most impressive win streaks in UFC history, all the way to the lightweight belt. At level 3, the weight cut is so drastic that it eventually catches up to fighters. While some can get away with it for a while, once age creeps in, the body simply stops responding. At 6'1", Michael Chiesa was one of the biggest 155ers we've ever seen inside the octagon. But the size advantage never really translated. He was never at the top of the division. What it eventually led to was a brutal weight cut miss, forcing him to move up.
For his fight with Anthony Pettis.
Michael Chiesa announces that this will be his last fight at lightweight. Again, Michael Chiesa, 157.5. He looks very sunken in.
Soon after moving to a more natural weight class, Chiesa won 4 fights in a row. And despite being up there in age, he's 6'3" at 170 pounds. Level 3 goes to show that no matter how much size you try to squeeze out of a division, the scale always wins in the end. And more often than not, fighters are better off preserving their health and fighting where their bodies naturally belong. The next stage of weight cutting takes the idea of being bigger and stronger to its extreme. At this level, size isn't just an advantage anymore, it's the entire game plan. If you're heavier than your opponent at fight night, and you specialize in making him carry your weight, you've unlocked one of the most punishing archetypes in MMA. A good wrestler with a weight advantage can make a fight feel almost unfair at certain points. After all, in grappling, every pound matters. Just look at the time catch wrestler and former UFC heavyweight Josh Barnett walked out in a giant diaper and dominated elite BJJ master Dean Lister. In MMA, these wrestlers will go through hell before the fight to cut down. But once they've rehydrated, these extra pounds turn into a dangerous advantage. Daniel Cormier at light heavyweight was a textbook case. Sure, he was always chunky, but that doesn't mean his cuts to 205 weren't brutal. One time, he almost didn't make it, or better yet, he didn't and tricked everyone by grabbing the towel at weigh-ins.
Now Daniel Cormier is back. Wow. Now Daniel Cormier is back and made weight. How did that happen?
The towel trick, while a classic, isn't cutting it anymore nowadays. Aaron Tao recently tried to pull it off, only to get caught doing so.
122 and a quarter, the official weight for Aaron Tao.
It's a little weird, right? What happened? They said 122.
What?
And
Did he do the DC? Did he grab the towel?
They're talking, and it looks like he's gonna have to weigh in again. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Way back in the day, Gleison Chibao used to be the poster child for weight bullies. He was a relentless grappler who secured over 80 takedowns during his UFC career, and strength and size surely helped him to score all those takedowns. The Brazilian competed at 155 while weighing over 180 pounds on fight night.
How do you cut to 155? You're such a big guy. What's your secret? How do you do that?
Yeah, everybody talk, wow, you fight, you 155? Yeah, the mentally is hard, it's good train, it's good diet, fog. I mean, lose 30 pounds they fight.
Wow. How much do you weigh right now?
180.
Funnily enough, Chibao's UFC career was pretty much done once USADA came in and banned IV hydration. But before leaving, he still gave another relentless wrestler who could wrestle bears, but not bathroom scales, the toughest fight of his career, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib dominated everyone, but against Chibao, he couldn't land a single takedown. For 3 rounds, he had to push forward, clinch, and grind, while Chibao's sheer size and defensive grappling kept him stuck. The fight was so close that to this day, some still believe Gleison should have won. And Nurmagomedov himself was far from a small lightweight. His walk-around weight hovered close to 200 pounds, making every cut to 155 a vicious ordeal. Throughout his career, Khabib fought as many battles with the scale as he did inside the cage. Notoriously, he had to pull out of UFC 209 when he was scheduled to fight Tony Ferguson for the interim lightweight title. The fight ended up being cancelled because Khabib had such a nasty weight cut that he was hospitalized. It happened just a few days after he was seen on UFC Embedded eating tiramisu, which makes the Italian dessert the only one ever to beat Nurmagomedov in the UFC. Several other grappling-heavy fighters also fit the mark. Islam Makhachev drained himself to make 155, and once he moved up to get to the second belt at welterweight, he looked as big as any other 170-pound fighter out there. As long as the severe weight cuts didn't affect endurance, the strategy seems to pay off handsomely. And if some wrestlers are defined by their battles with a scale, others seem to defy biology altogether. The next level of MMA weight cutting belongs to fighters who really had no business cutting that much weight and living to tell the story. UFC champion and Olympic gold medalist in judo Kayla Harrison is living proof of that. For nearly 2 decades, Harrison competed at 170 pounds in judo. After transitioning to MMA, Kayla competed as a lightweight and bantamweight at PFL. Her sheer size was one of the reasons why one of the most accomplished female fighters in the world spent much of her career outside the UFC. The thing is, after Nunes and Cyborg departed, the UFC's 145 division is basically dead, which meant that if Kayla Harrison was ever to fight at the biggest organization, she would have to squeeze herself all the way down to bantamweight. Not only that, she'd have to do it at 34 years of age. And despite looking like absolute death at the weigh-ins, Harrison still made 135.
The number 2 ranked bantamweight contender, Kayla Harrison.
Kayla Harrison attempting to make, I should say, let's give it a few seconds here, making 135. There it is, 135.0 for the first time in her career. I mean, that right there is the first most important thing for her to have success on Saturday night.
Another example of one of the most extreme biological miracle cuts in modern MMA would be Alex Pereira. Despite having a near heavyweight build, the Brazilian joined the UFC as a middleweight. The odd thing about Pereira is that despite walking around at 240 pounds, cutting down to 185 wasn't that much of an issue. He would cut all that weight, recover, and carry on to fight night, retaining cardio and punching power.
You know, going up 20 pounds to try to become double champ, that's tough. That's like a shitty weight class to want to be double champ. And unless you're Alex Pereira, I don't get how because when on the scale, he doesn't look super sucked in, like doesn't look like he just got done cutting 20 pounds, but that motherfucker is so massive. He made Izzy look small, and I've been around Izzy. Izzy's a big guy.
Yeah, Izzy's a long, tall man. And Pereira's just, everything was so... Did you see what Robert Whittaker said about it?
The big fella?
He goes, you see the size of this fella?
Yeah, I did.
He's a freaking giant.
He was such a massive middleweight that even after moving up 20 pounds, he still often looks like the bigger man. There's a real shot he moves up again next, and if he does, chances are he bulks up just enough to give away little, if any, size against natural heavyweights. Kenny Florian is another fighter who really shouldn't have been able to cut that much. The Peruvian is one of the only 2 fighters in the UFC's history to compete at 4 different weight classes. He first competed as a middleweight during TUF 1, later moved down to welterweight, and eventually settled at lightweight for most of his career. After falling short in a title eliminator against Gray Maynard, Florian made one last desperate bid for UFC gold, cutting down to 145 to challenge a prime Jose Aldo.
It was great, you know. I think honestly that this whole weight cut and going down, it was a true test of discipline, and I think it took me to the next level as far as mentally and what I'm capable of doing.
Guys like Pereira and Harrison completely challenge logic, pushing the limits of what the human body should be able to endure. But the next level of weight cutting presents fighters who actively choose to gamble with the scale. Some fighters live a healthy lifestyle year-round, eating clean and staying in shape regardless of being in camp or not. Some don't.
Some limon, add some guac, and then you add some salsa, bro. You stick it down your pipe hole.
Kelvin Gastelum was one of the most promising welterweights in the world. At 5'9", he had the build for the division, love handles included. A wrestler with fast hands, he came up to the scene in 2013 after winning the Ultimate Fighter 17. However, 2 fights at 170, and he missed weight. A couple of fights later, it happened again. It eventually got so bad that Dana White forced him to move up a weight class.
He just doesn't think I can do it. So, you know, actions speak louder than words. So I got till November to try and convince him and prove to him, you know, I'm going to get, you know, I've already hired a nutritionist. I've already made the necessary changes in order for me to prove that. So I have till November to convince him.
Despite being undersized, Gastelum had a run at 185, even coming close to the belt in his epic match against Adesanya. However, in 2025, Kevin missed weight again, this time by over 9 pounds while he was competing at middleweight. Fighters under the yo-yo effect like Gastelum are categorized by showing up, or at least trying to, in fight shape. But out of camp, they balloon out of control. Think of Johnny Hendricks. After losing the belt to Robbie Lawler, his weight problems began to spiral. He missed the 170-pound limit in 2 fights before being forced to move up a weight class. Hendricks wasn't even particularly big at welterweight, and when he moved up, he was dwarfed by every opponent.
Johnny Hendricks is not a huge 170. He makes himself a huge 170 because he can't keep himself away from the dinner plate. But he was making 165 on a 1-hour weigh-in, right? The college is 1-hour weigh-in, so you make the weight, and then 1 hour later you compete, which essentially prevents people from cutting a lot of water weight, because if you cut a lot of water weight, you're not going to be effective an hour later. So he's not a huge 170, and if he stayed disciplined on his diet, he could make it easy.
Even at 185, Hendricks managed to miss the weight class limit. And then we have perhaps the biggest example of all, Paddy Pimblett. While he always shows up in weight, out of camp he tends to go from Paddy the Batty to Paddy the Fatty.
The mozzarella is extra good, have these wings are good as well. Good warm up this for the mains.
There's a lot of meat on the bones.
So it's different. It's more like a pie, yeah.
Quiche pizza, you know.
A few weeks after his fights, Pimblett tends to gain tons of weight, and by the looks of it, we're not talking about lean mass.
I'm gonna eat well tonight, don't worry about that. I'll make up for it.
What do you reckon you weigh right now?
About 200.
Is that normal for you to get up to this height?
Don't know. You could say that. You could not say that.
The thing about getting ripped, then fat, then ripped again in only a couple of months is that it is actually pretty ruthless on the body. On top of the hormonal imbalance, this practice also puts heavy stress on organs like the kidneys and the liver.
It's not good for you, you know? I mean, we all know that. We know that fluctuating and cutting that much weight is very bad. And it definitely doesn't prolong your career.
And while playing with your health can be bad enough, the next level is reserved for fighters who deliberately push their bodies to the absolute limit. When former lightweight Gilbert Burns stepped in to fade Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 273, the two athletes looked like they belonged 3 weight classes apart. And they might as well have. Chimaev is 6'2" while not being particularly skinny. At welterweight, he was a giant. To make the 170-pound limit, however, he had to endure a brutal cut.
Don't stress.
Don't stress, don't worry.
Take it out.
At this final level of weight cutting, fighters need to go through hell and back again to make the weight, putting their bodies to the absolute limit. Much like other fighters pushing dehydration to its breaking point, Chimaev soon had to move up a weight class to compete. And weirdly enough, Khamzat still holds a size advantage at 185. Anthony Johnson, one of the hardest hitters the UFC's light heavyweight have ever seen, spent a good chunk of his career at freaking welterweight.
Anthony, I ran into him once in between fights, and I said, "How much do you weigh?" He said 230.
Wow.
He was fighting 170.
He switched how many weight classes? He started from 170, he went to light heavyweight, and then he ended up fighting in the heavyweight division.
He
right?
went to middleweight and didn't make weight. He missed weight and lost that fight, and then he fought heavyweight outside the UFC, and then came back and fought light heavyweight in the UFC.
Rumble forcing himself down to 170 was nothing short of madness. But in the road to making weight, perhaps none was harder than Chris Cyborg's. Cyborg was already one of the biggest stars in women's MMA when she joined the UFC. But similar to Kayla Harrison's case, the promotion didn't really have a division for her. The sport was as popular as it ever was for females, with fighters like Ronda, Holly Holm, and Miesha Tate carrying the UFC banner. Fans wanted to see Chris Cyborg in that mix, but there was one problem. The cut to 145 was already harsh, and adding another 10 pounds to that mix would prove impossible. Chris and the UFC even tried to get her down there. In her first 2 fights with the promotion, she competed at catchweight, cutting as low as 139 pounds. But getting that low was absolutely terrifying.
The bath for me the worst case, because burning really hot.
Baby, breathe, baby. Baby, it's 105 degrees.
I go inside the bath and I pray there and I cry.
We see fighters go into kidney failure as a result of their weight cut.
At this level, the weight cutting process becomes dangerous. Fighters are no longer just trimming down, they're pushing their bodies past safe limits.
I firmly believe that if weight cutting did exist, and then people started doing it now, they would try to ban it. They would try to say, don't do that. That's dangerous. You're 24 hours before you're going to have a cage fight. You're going to dehydrate yourself to death's door. To death's door. I've seen some dudes that were on death's door.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Travis Lutter, when he fought Anderson Silva, was the worst I ever saw a man when he was cutting weight. Travis couldn't walk. He was shuffling to the scale.
When the battle with physiology becomes bigger than the fight itself, and the scale becomes the true final boss, athletes are playing a dangerous game that could legitimately end in tragedy. At the end of the day, the scale is the UFC's true final boss, undefeated, unforgiving, and always waiting for the next victim, one battle. Behind the scenes, the UFC has another game entirely, shaping careers, building stars, and planting fighters into the spotlight. Make sure to watch my breakdown of the 7 levels of UFC industry plants next. Thanks for watching.